Well, howdy again everyone, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about how I'm finally fulfilling what appear to be the hopes and dreams of a huge number of my subscribers. I'm finally going to include Nikon equipment in the roster of lenses that I test out on this channel. Nice. You have no idea how many people have asked me over the years to test out Nikon lenses. Well, here we are. I'm doing it with the aid of a new Nikon Z7 camera with its awesome full-frame 45 megapixel sensor. I have also bought the very nice Ftz Adapter for testing older Nikon lenses for digital SLRs, and I've got a 24 megapixel Nikon APS-C digital SLR camera as well for me to use for APS-C testing, so I'm really stretching out and investing in this channel for you at the moment. And thinking of that, I'd like to thank my very generous supporters over on Patreon for helping me to make that investment in the first place. Your generosity is really helping this channel to branch out more and more. So today, let's take a little look at the Nikon Z7. There are plenty of excellent, in-depth technical reviews out there for this wonderful camera already, and I don't really do that kind of camera review on this YouTube channel, to be honest, but I would like to show you a few things that I like and don't like about the Z7, and I'll also talk a little bit about how it's been for me to handle my first ever Nikon camera after using Canon, Sony and Fuji cameras for so many years now. So if you are looking for a deeply technical review, then look away now. These aren't the droids you're looking for. By the way, all the sample pictures you can see in this review are taken by the 24-70mm f4 kit lens, which performed very nicely in my tests, by the way. Firstly, the things I like about the Z7. Let's start by taking a look at the camera's build quality. I really like the size and shape and build quality of the camera. It feels very, very tough. It looks the business, all the buttons press down quite nicely. You really feel like you're handling one tough, durable piece of kit. Secondly, I like the customizable buttons, particularly the ones near the lens mount. They can be very useful. I use the top one for white balance. And I really like the stills and video switch button. That's always great to see on a camera. Next, the screen and the viewfinder are sharp, clear and bright, and their colour balance is absolutely perfect between them, something you don't always see on other camera brands I've tested. Next, I quite like the Ftz Adapter, but there are two downsides to it. Firstly, its insultingly high price of about $180 US. What a slap in the face for an adapter. Secondly, it cannot autofocus with Nikon's older D-type lenses, but it does work perfectly with Nikon's more modern G-type lenses, fitting them onto your camera very securely, and apart from the occasional autofocus miss, it seems to work fantastically well so far. And another thing I love to see is in-body image stabilization. This is one of my favourite things. It really does work so satisfyingly well, as you can see here, except if you're using extremely wide-angle lenses. I also really like that the aperture stops down in preview mode before you take your picture, so you can see exactly what your picture will look like, although this can slow down your autofocus a little if you stop down too much. And now, the most important thing, image quality. The 45 megapixel sensor of the Nikon Z7 produces images that are jam-packed with detail, as you'd expect, and what I particularly like about Nikon cameras is that they capture fine details in busy scenes exceptionally well. This is one of the most fantastically detailed sensors you could imagine, making it an unstoppably awesome camera for landscape photography, not to mention its simply awesome dynamic range. Its high ISO sensitivity is fairly average for a modern full-frame camera, which is good. Shooting up to ISO 3200, you won't have huge amounts of problems with image noise. It's really quite similar to Canon and Sony's full-frame cameras in that respect, which is nice. When it comes to image quality, the only thing I slightly prefer about Canon cameras is their colours. The Nikon colours are fine, very nice actually, but I find they normally need more adjustment and tweaking in editing to get absolutely right. I've sometimes found a slight red tint to my images, and even more so if you're taking pictures in candlelight, but again, having said that, I really like the extensive white balance options available, including natural light auto, again useful for landscape work. Next, the camera's video quality is also very nice, offering 4K footage across the whole sensor. and various cropped modes too, including 1080p at 120 frames per second. That's useful, although the video output isn't quite as sharp as on my Sony a7R II, or even my Canon EOS R. Finally, I quite like the lenses I've tested so far on the system. Nikon lenses are pretty sharp, well, most of them anyway, and even the very cheap ones have decent enough build quality. I'm talking about the digital SLR lenses there, but those native Z mount lenses are even better. Their quality is really through the roof, and I can't wait to show you some reviews of them. Okay, well, I could probably mention even more things if I really thought about it, but let's just say there's a lot to like about the Nikon Z7, it's great. Here are some things I didn't like so much, but bear in mind, some of these will just be me getting used to a different camera system. Firstly, a couple of things mildly bother me about the camera's design. It doesn't sit in hand quite as well as my Canon EOS R. And I really don't like the buttons around the shutter button and their placement. That ISO button is very awkwardly placed and tricky to get used to. Secondly, the autofocus is nowhere near as snappy as it is on my Canon EOS R, and particularly in low light situations, the Canon camera is far more confident. I far prefer the autofocus on Canon's cameras, which is borderline miraculous to me, and this was with the Nikon camera having the latest firmware version 3. I also found the Z7 sometimes missing shots in its eye autofocus mode too, focusing a bit too closely. Next, the lens mount. Lenses mount onto the camera anti-clockwise, differently from other camera systems, which really throws me off. Okay, that's a silly one, but it's just really bugging me, particularly trying to get the rear lens caps on and off. No one told me that this thing doesn't use SD cards, so I had to blow over £100 on an XQD card, and it was only 32GB. Very annoying. It's also compatible with CF Express cards, especially with the latest firmware update, and I've heard that they are really the way forward for this camera though, being a bit more future-proof. I'm no expert on memory cards though. Next, moire. This camera does struggle with moire more than any other I've tested so far. It's not terrible by any means at all, but it can be easily visible in my test pictures here on horizontal lines, and it creeps into your real world pictures and video footage just occasionally. But that's it really. That's my silly list of things I don't like about the camera. As you can tell, I don't really have many of them. I'll take a minute now just to compare it to my Canon EOS R. Well, that's a rather unfair test actually, as the Nikon camera is so much more expensive. But firstly, although I preferred the colours of the Canon camera, particularly the skin tones, the Nikon camera has way more to offer landscape photographers in terms of image quality I think, from the in-body image stabilization to the extra resolution and dynamic range. Oh yeah, that's another thing, the dynamic range of this thing is great, and it handles fine details better as well. I do prefer the way the Canon camera feels in my hand and handles generally, although the Nikon camera certainly looks a heck of a lot cooler, and the lenses are a bit less plasticky, which inspires a bit more confidence in their durability. I really much prefer the snappy autofocus of the Canon EOS R though, particularly when shooting in low light, and the Canon camera never seems to miss focus, while occasionally the Nikon does. I'd feel far more confident using the Canon EOS R to take pictures of my family or a wedding for instance. The Nikon Z7 is a really expensive piece of kit, but a very accomplished one, and I'm having a great time testing it out so far. Really, when you give them a bit of practice, most cameras work virtually the same. My Canon EOS R is going to be in my hand for casual and candid photography, shooting at parties and so on. The Nikon I'd prefer to use for landscape shooting. But my old Sony a7R II is still my first choice for video work by a bit of a way.